Welcome to episode 109 of the Political Mike podcast. During the 2011 debt ceiling crisis and negotiations between President Barack Obama and House Speaker John Boehner, John Green of The Atlantic explained the now routine debt ceiling fights this way. It's the pointless, silly, and potentially very costly two-step process by which the United States and no other country goes about budgeting and spending money. First, Congress passes a budget resolution that determines how much will be spent. Then it raises the debt ceiling to accommodate that spending. Towards the end of this past May, the United States got dangerously close to financial calamity as lawmakers sparred on day's end over what it would take to raise the country's $31.4 trillion debt limit. Financial markets became more jittery as the U.S. moved closer to the X date, June 5th. The centerpiece of the agreement reached between President Joe Biden and his negotiations team and Speaker Kevin McCarthy and his team is a 2-year suspension of the debt ceiling, which caps the total amount of money the government is allowed to borrow. Suspending that cap, which is now set at $31.4 trillion, would allow the government to keep borrowing money and pay its bill on time. The bill cuts so-called non-defense discretionary spending, which includes domestic law enforcement, forest management, scientific research, and more for the 2024 fiscal year. It also limits all discretionary spending to 1% growth in 2025, which is effectively a budget cut because that is projected to be slower than the rate of inflation. You can't help but wonder, what if there was a way to do away with this routine brinkmanship on the debt ceiling? What if there was a way Congress could just pass the budget and the debt ceiling could be deemed raised? In 1979, a young congressman named Richard Gephardt proceeded to do something about that. He said that he had just gotten on Congress when Tip O'Neill, Speaker of the House, gave him the assignment to pass the debt ceiling. Back then, the ceiling was below $1 trillion. But Gephardt's job was difficult and lousy. Democrats were in charge of Congress, but nobody ever wanted to vote for it. Republicans wouldn't give us votes, Mr. Gephardt said. So it was our responsibility. Every time it came up, I had to go to every member and seek their vote. It was painful and difficult, and I thought unnecessary. Mr. Gephardt would ask congressmen and women, did you vote for the appropriations bill, the defense bill, the highway bill? They'd all say yes. Then he would respond, well, then you got to pay the bill. If you didn't mean it, don't vote for it. Then you won't have to pay for it. Mr. Gephardt realized that the easiest way to fix the problem and impose rationality on the process was to do away with the second vote. He consulted the parliamentarian of the Congress. He asked if there was a way that they could pass a budget that could be deemed raised to accommodate the budget people are actually voting for. Thus was born the Gephardt rule. For a period thereafter, the adoption of the conference report on the budget resolution would trigger the Gephardt rule and deemed to have passed legislation raising the debt limit to accommodate the spending and revenue levels approved in the budget. But it did not last. When Republicans took back the House in 1995, they bought back the second vote as a way to pressure members on spending. Today, I have the honor and privilege of speaking with none other than Mr. Dick Gephardt himself, former House Majority Leader and President and CEO of the renowned Gephardt Group. Mr. Gephardt's political career spans decades, marked by his notable tenure as the House Majority Leader and his unwavering dedication to public service. In addition to his distinguished political career, Mr. Gephardt is also an accomplished author with his latest book titled 535, Not One. Through his insightful work, he offers a unique perspective of the inner workings of Congress, shining a light on the intricate dynamics that shape our nation's policies and laws. He served 28 years in the Congress, with more than 14 years as the House Democratic leader, and he was a presidential candidate in 1988 and 2004. Mr. Gephardt, thank you so much for being part of the Political Mike.
Thank you, Michael.
So I want to ask you, Mr. Gephardt, drawing from your experience in lining up the votes for the budget reduction plan in 1993, what are your thoughts on the challenges faced by leaders in navigating such high-stake negotiations?
Well, they're very high. The toughest thing you can ever do in Congress is a budget that gets bipartisan support so you can actually execute on the budget, make it happen. And budgets are really, you're coming to the fulcrum of the disagreement between the parties. The Democratic Party is more leaning toward federal spending to solve problems like infrastructure, education, healthcare, defense, whatever. And Republicans also like those programs, but they're also always wanting to cut the taxes of people that pay for the programs. So trying to get an agreement on a comprehensive budget that encompasses all of that is very, very difficult. So I worked on the first big reduction in the deficit, which we got done with George H.W. Bush in 1990. And then I worked with Bill Clinton in 1993 in order to take the next big step toward balancing the federal budget, which we accomplished toward the end, excuse me, of the 1990s. It was the hardest thing I ever worked on. It made the debt ceiling vote look like easy. And both times it was a result of a 8 or 9 month negotiation between all the members of the House and the Senate, along with the White House, to come with a package that could get 218 votes in the House and 51 votes in the Senate, which is very hard to do. But we got it done both times, and that's the last time the federal budget has been balanced. It was balanced for 3 or 4 years at the end of the 90s, and now it's way out of control. And we've got, as you just said, $14 trillion debt ceilings that we need to accommodate.
So, Mr. Gephardt, in your book 535, Not One, you delve into the inner workings of Congress. Could you give us a glimpse into the dynamics that exist within the legislative body and how it influences policymaking?
So you got to start this discussion with a simple historical fact. In 1789, the founders who wrote the American Constitution were embodying in that writing a radical idea at the time. And I would say it's still pretty radical. The radical idea is people can govern themselves. You don't need to have a dictator, one human being who makes all the decisions for all the rest of us. And so they wrote and got approval, with a lot of compromises, I might add, the U.S. Constitution. And that means that ever since then, at the federal level and at all the state levels, we've been trying to govern ourselves by self-government, which means you have, in the federal case, 535 people in the room, not one. Just imagine being on a committee of 535 people that represents 340 million Americans. It's a very diverse group. It's geographically diverse. The beliefs are diverse. And I'm always fond of saying that in my time in Congress, what I quickly learned was that all 535 members agree with all the other members, disagree with all the other members on everything. So it's like a big family. Just imagine being in a family of 535 people, And your job is to settle big differences and make policy that governs the rest of the people in the country. So I think often in these discussions, we expect too much from democracy. It's really hard. It's really hard work. If you want to be in Congress, if you're not willing to work really hard, then you shouldn't be there. If you were coming to Congress to make money, you shouldn't be there. This is public service. You're a public servant of the people that sent you there to do this very difficult job. And so if you don't put country over party and country over self every day, then you're not going to be a very good member of Congress. So what I want people to get from the book is that even though this process is really hard, it is so much more superior than you can imagine than letting one person make all those decisions. Letting one person make all the decisions, if you think about it, is the default position for human governance through history. That's where we have been through most of the history of humankind. We've had dictators, kings, emperors, people, pharaohs, people who ran all the societies through history. And America is a lone exception. There are now others, thankfully, but it's a lone exception to what was the default position of governance of human beings. So we have to understand that this is a huge development in human evolution, in my humble opinion, but that it never will be easy. It will always be hard. And as Winston Churchill said, democracy is the worst form of government on earth, except for all the others. And he was right. So we got to keep on keeping on. We got to have faith in one another. We have to try to elect public servants who put country over self and country over party, so that we send people there that can get these issues resolved on behalf of and for the welfare of every American.
So, Mr. Gephardt, what are your thoughts on some of the concessions that President Biden and his debt ceiling negotiations team recently made to Speaker McCarthy, such as limits on the growth of federal discretionary spending over the next 2 years? Biden also agreed to some new work requirements for certain recipients of food stamps and the temporary aid for needy families program. What are your thoughts on those concessions?
I'm sure that he didn't want to make those concessions. I'm sure he doesn't agree with those concessions, but that is the nature of any compromise. In my time in the House, I saw a lot of really controversial, tough issues result in a compromise that basically got a majority vote in both houses, barely, because at the end of any compromise, everybody, and when I say everybody, I mean everybody in Congress and probably lots and lots of people out in the country, are pretty damn unhappy. They gave too much to get too little. But they finally decided that getting something done was more important than not getting it done. And so they reluctantly, grudgingly agreed to that compromise. So I don't agree, as I'm sure Joe Biden didn't agree with either of those concessions, but he had to make them, and the Democrats had to accept them in order to get the thing done and avoid an economic disaster for everybody in the country.
How can leaders effectively communicate the urgency and potential consequences of reaching the debt limit to the public and their fellow lawmakers? You were mentioning how there are folks in the country who feel as if both, their side conceded too much. How do lawmakers convey to those folks that compromise is the only way in which government can effectively work, and not only that, but there are dire consequences if we don't compromise?
So a member of Congress has two major different responsibilities. First responsibility is to go to Washington, meet with the other members, do the work that you have to do to get legislation created and passed. The second job is to go back to your district or state and communicate regularly with all of your constituents so that you can explain to them why you voted for what you voted for and what Congress agreed to and why it's a good or a bad thing. I went door to door, literally, for 28 years. And when I say I went door to door, I mean I went door to door. I would do it on a weekend when I went home, 12 and 14 hours a day. I met thousands of people. I had a swing district. It was evenly split between Democrats and Republicans. So I just knew that a lot of my Republican voters would hate every vote. Hate. But I had to get in front of them to explain it, to have a chance to get them to understand why I did what I did. Often I would have Republican voters say to me, I hated every vote you made, but you came to my door repeatedly. You came to my aunt's door, my grandmother's door, whatever. And I know you. I know you. I've met you. I think you're a good person. I don't agree with you on anything, but I think you mean well. I think you care about us. I think you're trying to do your best to make good decisions. So I always vote for you. It's that simple. You've got to communicate. Now, if you're a U.S. Senator, pretty hard to go door to door in a state like New York or California. You never see a fraction of the people you represent. But you have to find other ways to communicate. But you have to be physically present in your state as much as you can be and go to as many gatherings of human beings, voters, as you possibly can. And let me tell you what that gets you. And members used to say to me, I can't vote for the debt ceiling because I'd lose the next election, or I can't vote for this budget because it's got a gasoline tax in it and I'll lose in the next election. And I would say to them, why did you come here? Did you come here for this stupid job? Or did you come here to make the country better? Did you come here to represent the interests of your people? Sometimes they would listen to that and do that. Sometimes they wouldn't. Everybody's different. But my point was, that's your job. Your job is to come here and vote and work on legislation. But the equal part of your job is to go home and explain it. And let me tell you what all of this gets all of us. What's the advantage? People say to me, Congress is fouled up. They can't decide anything. They're all messed up. Everybody is, trying to be a celebrity and they're not working together and blah, blah, blah. And I say, yeah, it's kind of dysfunctional, but don't blame it on Congress. What about the people? In a democracy, the people run the show, not the leaders, not the members of Congress. And if the people are bitterly divided, as I think they are today, then Congress is going to be bitterly divided. It's a reflection of the people. It has to be. That's what it is. But that doesn't mean that the members can't take that problem on and go home and explain to the people that are deeply offended by decisions they make of why they made those decisions. And then if they lose the election, they lose the election. That's the way it works. So, but let me tell you what we all get from this in the end of the day. The magic of democracy, to me, I saw a lot of really tough, controversial issues decided with big compromises that were hotly contested and debated. And I saw at the end of the debate, and when the thing got decided, roughly half of the country was really upset, really angry at what had happened. But what I also learned was that even the people that were bitterly disappointed were willing to grudgingly accept that result because they thought the process by which the decision was reached was fair. Their side was heard. We had a vote. The process for voting was fair. People trusted it and believed in it, and therefore they were grudgingly willing to put up with that result. In a dictatorship, that does not happen. That would not happen. If we had one person running this country as the state and the law and the government in one person, this country would be in rebellion and revolt every day of the week. That's the magic of democracy. But it's really hard, and it takes public servants who are willing to do both parts of the job as well as they possibly can. It is a 24/7 job. It always has been, and it always will be.
So I'm glad you pivoted to the topic of democracy, because the Supreme Court recently ruled that the Republican congressional map in Alabama, where the population is 27% black, violated the Voting Rights Act by slicing up majority black areas so that only one of the state's 7 districts, or 14%, had a majority of black residents. Democrats, of course, could pick up 1 seat with the revised Alabama map, and other southern states with similar legal fights, like Louisiana and Georgia, also could be forced to draw new maps that net the party additional seats. Cook Political Reports' David Wasserman tweeted that this could reverberate to LA, South Carolina, and/or Georgia, forcing creation of 2 to 4 new black majority districts and netting Democrats 2 to 4 seats, which would, of course, change the control of the House of Representatives. What are your thoughts about the Supreme Court's recent ruling that the Voting Rights Act lost its teeth, lost the strength that it had with the removal of Section 5 back in 2013 in the Shelby versus Holder decision? What are your thoughts in light of this new decision that the Supreme Court came to?
My first comment would be thank God. Thank God. I never thought they'd do this. I thought the Voting Rights Act was on the trash heap of history. I served with John Lewis. I served with a lot of other representatives who fought their hearts out to reenact the Voting Rights Act, to keep it alive, to keep it strong. And it's been eroded, as you just said, over the years. And I am elated that it got held back together by the Supreme Court. I did not expect that. And I'm thrilled that that's what they decided to do. That's what other courts in the past have done. So this is not out of the ordinary, but in this time and place, it is out of the ordinary. So I'm very, very pleased. Look, what I just told you about people being willing to believe the process in Congress is fair applies just as well, if not more, to having elections in the country. Our founders said, this is self-government, government of, by, and for the people. That means every human being in the country has to be able to vote and express their preferences, their beliefs, their desires on who they vote for office. When the Constitution was written, and long thereafter, women and minorities were not allowed to vote. They only got those rights late in the day. So the Voting Rights Act, which really came from John Lewis, Martin Luther King, that whole period of our history, is vital to ensuring that this democracy meets and keeps its promise that every human being in this society, every citizen of the right age gets to be able to vote without intimidation, without suppression, without anything. They can express their decisions. So I am thrilled that that passed, and I hope that we keep on the beam with the Voting Rights Act in the future.
You know, there was a time not that long ago when Donald J. Trump, then a candidate for office, said that he cared about the sanctity of classified information. Of course, that was when his opponent, Hillary Clinton, was accused of jeopardizing it with a private email server. 7 years later now, Mr. Trump faces criminal charges for endangering national security by taking classified documents when he left the White House and refused to return all of them, even after being subpoenaed. He will be arraigned tomorrow. Many have jumped to his defense on the Republican side. You have Jim Jordan, and you also have Lindsey Graham jumping to his defense. I want to play what Lindsey Graham had to say.
Donald Trump has said repeatedly that he did nothing wrong. Do you believe that?
Well, here's what I believe. We live in an America where if you're the Democratic candidate for president, Hillary Clinton, Secretary of State, you can set up a private server in your basement to conduct government business. And when an investigation is had about your activity, no, let me finish.
But you didn't answer the question.
That was ridiculous. Well, yeah, I'm trying to answer the question from a Republican point of view. That may not be acceptable on this show. Yes, I don't like what President Trump did in certain aspects. I don't like that Joe Biden had classified information on the garage. I don't like that Mike Pence carelessly took classified information. I don't like any of that. But what I don't like is a system in America where the Secretary of State, who's a Democratic candidate for president, has people take a hammer to social media devices and break them apart, apply bleach bit to a hard drive to erase emails, allow classified information to get on a felon's computer, Anthony Weiner. You haven't even mentioned that. Most Republicans believe we live in a country where Hillary Clinton did very similar things and nothing happened to her. President Trump will have his day in court, but espionage charges are absolutely ridiculous. Whether you like Trump or not, he did not commit espionage. He did not disseminate, leak, or provide information to a foreign power or to a news organization to damage this country. He is not a spy. He's overcharged. Did he do things wrong? Yes, he may have. He will be tried about that, but Hillary Clinton wasn't. Your old boss committed perjury in a civil lawsuit, lost his law license, obstructed justice in a dozen ways, and he didn't get prosecuted. I know.
And he was impeached.
Well,
Senator, okay,
he was impeached, but he wasn't prosecuted.
You've made your point, but you also said something that I believe is not true based on what's in the indictment. You said that he did not disseminate any of this information. In fact, there's an audio tape in the indictment where he's talking about the secret information, saying he knows it's secret, knows it's not declassified.
Okay, let's talk about that. I don't know what happened. I haven't heard the audio, but look at who's been charged under Espionage Act. Julian Assange, Edward Snowden, Chelsea Manning. people who turn over classified information to news organizations to hurt the country or provide it to a foreign power. That did not happen here.
That was this week, yesterday, with George Stephanopoulos. Lindsey Graham, of course, trying to portray that there is a different standard that Republicans are held to than Democrats. Now, you've been, the House Majority Leader. You're familiar with handling classified documents and things of that nature. What are your thoughts in response to not just the president's conduct, but the defense in which many on his side of the aisle have jumped to? You're going to have some presidential candidates like Vivek Ramaswamy saying that he would pardon Trump if elected president.
Well, what Lindsey was doing is the classic case of whataboutism. And that is not an answer to any question. That's just a deflection from being able to comment on this particular case. What he should have said, and what I would hope people would say, is, I don't know what a jury will decide. The case is the case. The indictment is the indictment. We can all read it and make our own judgment. But the only judgment that matters is what a jury of 12 American citizens believes about that indictment after they've heard all the evidence. So everybody is leaping ahead to he's guilty, he's not guilty, whataboutism, blah, blah, blah. Look, we have a set of rules in this country. It's called rule of law. And it is the foundation of having a democracy. You have to have rules, and you have to have umpires, that's judges, and juries that decide whether a rule has been violated or not. That's our system. If we lose that system, we're done. It is the bedrock of this democracy. So when people play loose and fast with the rule of law, they're playing loose and fast with our ability to retain our democracy. If we don't have rule of law, then you have one person, and I'll go back to where I started this discussion, who is the law and is the state. Dictators' first task is to destroy the state, because the state and the law protect all the citizens. We all have rights, we all have obligations under those laws. And if that's blown up and you have one person deciding all of it for whatever reason, then you're not a democracy, and you fall into what I call the default position of human governance in history, which is to have one person run the show, lock, stock, and barrel.
And you also have Lindsey Graham saying, well, forget the facts, but half of the country believes X, Y, and Z. Half of the country believes that this is an unfair, political motivated, attack by the Justice Department. Half of the country believes that the DOJ has been weaponized under the current administration.
About this, but I cannot stress to you enough that we live in a world today where most Republicans believe that Hunter Biden's laptop was real, and people knew it was real, but they told the public something else to help Joe Biden. We live in a world where it takes 4 years to investigate Hunter Biden, and you can go after Donald Trump in about 18 months. I know you don't get what I'm saying, but people on my side believe it. And I think Donald Trump is stronger today politically than he was before. I think the espionage charges are ridiculous. I think what happened to Hillary Clinton, where she got away with it, is very similar to what happened to the President Trump. We'll have an election and we'll have a trial. But I promise you this, most Americans believe, most Republicans believe, that the law is used as a weapon against Donald Trump.
Well, this is the politicization of the legal system. It is saying that everything is political. The legal system has no credibility. They're breaking trust that people have in the legal system, just like they've been trying to break trust in the electoral system. And if you blow these institutions up, we're going to lose the democracy. And I'm very worried about it. We're in a world today where politics has descended into attacking the system of our governance as a way to win elections. We're playing with fire, and we're going to burn the house down if people don't stop it and start working to make the system to be trusted. We avoided having a broken election in 2020 by an inch. By an inch. 6 or 7 elected state officials in 6 or 7 states resisted the tremendous pressure that Donald Trump put on them to not do the right thing and say how the people in their state voted and what that meant. If we keep attacking the system and breaking people's trust in the system, then we're going to lose the democracy. What I said a minute ago was that in my time in Congress, I saw lots of big things get decided. People were very upset about those decisions, but they were willing to grudgingly accept the result because they thought the process was fair. If people think the electoral process, if people think the legal process is unfair, we're done. We're playing with fire, and we're going to burn the house down. That's my worry about how people are handling this issue and lots of other issues today.
And Mr. Gephardt, you ran in 2003, 2004, looking to take on George W. Bush. Now, in light of your experience as a candidate for the presidency, who scares you the most, besides Trump, as it pertains to what the Republican field is shaping up to be? You've got Chris Christie, who is really taking the case to Trump head on, like no other candidate has done so far, by saying that he made the country weaker. He violated the rule of law, like you had mentioned, and that if we elect him again, the Constitution would continue to be trampled upon. You have other candidates who are looking to up the ante, like Vivek Ramaswamy saying he'll pardon Trump. Pence looking to try to find a fine line between calling his former boss, guilty, and then saying that he deserves his fair day in court and that he should be unfairly targeted. Who, in your view, poses the most threat to be able to defeat the current president, Joe Biden, if they were to receive the nomination?
Well, it's hard to say that yet until you see how the thing progresses. I think Trump is a clear and present danger to continuing to have a democracy. He tried to overthrow the electoral process and incited people to violence in 2020. We know that. Those are facts. I'm worried about Ron DeSantis, not just because of his views. That it's fine to disagree with one another over all the issues. That doesn't bother me. But if he is not willing to support the legal process and the electoral process, then we got a big problem with him. I think some of the others, I don't know. I don't know where they'd come out. The good news, I think, is that none of them seem to be as over the side of the ship as Donald Trump on wanting to overthrow the whole system. So if any of them happens to win, I don't think it will be catastrophic for our democracy. I hope it wouldn't be, but I don't know. I mean, people have learned a lot from what Donald Trump has done. I think the Republican Party that I knew when I was in politics is gone. And it's not gone just because of what the leaders are doing. It's because the people are where they are. You know, people talk a lot about, oh, Trump can get nominated, he can't get nominated, blah, blah, blah. Don't give me your opinion. Go out and talk to the people that are going to participate. They make the decision. You don't. And if I read the polling correctly, he's got an iron lock on 40% of Republican voters that are going to vote in the election, in the primary elections. So who knows? I mean, there's a long way to go between here and the primary process. But if I had to bet something today, and I wouldn't do that, I would say he's going to be the nominee. And I think he has a decent and maybe good chance to defeat Joe Biden. And so that's where we are. There's also talk of third parties getting involved. That, I think, would bleed more votes from Biden than Trump. And that may be enough to get Trump over the line. In fact, I think if a serious third party is put on the ballot that would attract independent and moderate voters in the big 6, 7 swing states, I think that would elect Donald Trump.
There are a lot of folks saying, you know, President Trump could actually be elected after being indicted, after, you know, being found guilty.
Yeah.
Now, in your view, how do you view the refusal to return classified documents after being subpoenaed, and what consequences should be in place to prevent someone from doing this again? Another president of the United States, another high-level federal government official, and still being able to take office if they were to be found guilty.
Well, the problem we've got is that I'm skeptical that you're going to get this trial to be held before the 24 election. And if that's the case and he wins, then he can pardon himself after he's in office. This all goes back to where we started this discussion. 1789, we said the people can govern themselves. And now we're on the cusp of an authoritarian model being implemented in this country. So, you know, I don't think you need any new laws on the books. You just need to enforce the laws we have on documents. And if he's guilty, and a jury has to decide that, I don't decide that, you don't decide it. But if that's their decision, then he should be held accountable. But that's why I think he announced his candidacy early, because he saw this coming. And his best defense against actually being caught up in it is to keep running and to delay the trials of all this stuff until after the election.
And my last question, Mr. Gephardt, is, you know, you were inspired by President Kennedy in college to pursue a career in public service. What do you say to young people today who look at what's going on in the realm of politics, and they don't like what they're seeing? They don't like the constant heated discussions. They don't like the thick tension between Democrats and Republicans. They don't like the fact that there's always some unprecedented drama unfolding as we get further and further into this Trump saga. And many of them may view the career in politics with skepticism, or maybe somewhat disdain or apathy. What is your response to those who may want to engage in a public service career, but are a little deterred by what they're seeing in the headlines today?
Don't be deterred. We've always had people misperform and do bad things through our history. There's nothing new there. There may be more of it now than there used to be, but there's always been a lot of it. and look for people that you can model yourself after. And there are a lot of them out there today. There are a lot of governors, there's a lot of House members, there's a lot of senators, there's a lot of local people who are mayors and state representatives and state senators. And wherever you are, wherever you live, wherever you would think of getting into politics, find the people that you would want to model yourself after. There are a lot of them. I've met a lot of them. And frankly, in both parties, obviously there's more Democrats in my view than Republicans, but there's still a lot of them out there. And just seek them out. I'll give you one example, and I don't know him well, and he's got to perform, but Wes Moore, who's the new governor in Maryland, appears to be a sensational public servant. And there are many others, men and women, minorities, you name it, you can find them. So model yourself after them. And when people ask me, how do you get into politics? I say, just do it. Do it. When I got out of law school, I came back to where I'd grown up in St. Louis. And a lot of my law school fellow students knew that I was interested in politics, that I loved Jack Kennedy, and I was inspired to get in it. And they said, oh, you got to go to Washington. You got to be an aide or an intern for a member of Congress. That's the way to get in politics. And I thought, that doesn't make sense. You do politics where you're going to run. You got to do politics from wherever you're going to live. And so I came back to St. Louis. I'm 25 years old. I went to the local Democratic organization, and I walked in this room. It was in an American Legion Hall in South St. Louis. And the committeeman was named Phelim O'Toole. He was the clerk of the circuit court. He was pretty old, and he was disabled with arthritis. He was in a wheelchair, but he had a big cigar. And I said, Mr. O'Toole, I'm Dick Gephardt, and I came here to volunteer. And he looked at me like I was nuts. And he said, what? I said, I want to volunteer. He said, nobody comes here and volunteers. I said, well, that's what I want to do. He said, okay, you can be a precinct captain. I'm going to make you the precinct captain of the 2nd precinct of the 14th Ward. I said, what's my job? He said, your job is to go out and go door to door and meet everybody in the precinct. Keep a list, figure out who's probably a D, who's an R, who's an independent. Mark that down on your list. Then on election day, I want you to go to the polling place. We'll give you sample ballots for the Democratic candidates. And I want you to stand outside the place and hand out the ballot. You got to be there at 6 a.m. And if by 4 o'clock, any of the people you identified as Democrats have not shown up, then you go get in your car and you go out and try to bring them in to vote. That's politics. And that's how to get involved in it. You're not going to get involved running off the bat for state representative or city council or anything else. Get in at the ground level, learn how it works, and then keep on keeping on until you can become a public servant.
Well, Mr. Gephardt, I thoroughly enjoyed our discussion. Thank you so much for the invaluable insight you've given. And again, the book is called 535 Not One. Wonderful read. Thank you so much, Mr. Gephardt, for sharing your insight with us on the Political Mic. With that being said, that will conclude episode 109 of the Political Mic podcast. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.
Hi, it's Mike Taylor, the host of the Political Mike podcast. If you like what you heard tonight, I want to invite you to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I also want to ask you to please follow along on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, TuneIn, and Amazon Music. You can also follow along and keep up with the conversation through our Telegram channel. Follow us on Twitter at @ThePollyMike, and follow us on Instagram. Thank you so much, and no matter what part of the political spectrum that you fall on, I want to encourage you to stay engaged, stay a part of the conversation, and stay informed. Thank you.